Have you ever felt like the world just stopped seeing you? Not because you disappeared, but because you became quiet. You gave, you nurtured, you kept the lights on the floors, swept the birthdays remembered. And then one day, it's as if your name vanished from the stories being told. You're still here, still breathing, still waking up each morning. But somehow you became invisible. This story begins in a quiet kitchen lit by the soft gold of an autumn afternoon. A woman sits alone at the table, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of chamomile tea. Her hair is silver, now swept into a low, elegant bun. A worn photograph of a boy is pinned to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a heart. The house is still, the porch swing outside unmoved. Her name is Martha. She's 68. And today, she's finally ready to speak her truth. She never expected life to turn out this way. Like many women of her generation, Martha grew up believing in quiet dreams. A porch swing, a husband's laughter, Sunday dinners and grandchildren playing tag on the lawn. Her husband, Tom, was a good man. Steady hands, a quiet voice. Every morning he'd kiss her forehead and say, "Don't wait up, hun." And she never did, until the day she wished she had. When the phone rang that afternoon, the voice on the other end didn't need to say much. There had been an accident, a scaffolding collapse. Tom was gone before the ambulance arrived. No goodbyes, no time to prepare, just gone. The stew on the stove burned. The house felt colder. The world became quieter. She didn't cry, not right away. She turned off the burner, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the knot in the wooden floor. For hours, maybe more. She doesn't remember. The funeral was a blur. People brought casseroles. They touched her shoulder and said things like, "Stay strong," or "He's in a better place." But none of it filled the hole. A week later, a man from the construction company handed her a check, $40,000. That was the price they put on her husband's life. No insurance, no fight to win. Just this or nothing. She took it, not because it felt fair, but because she had no other choice. She folded it and placed it in the back of a drawer next to Tom's wallet, his reading glasses, and the old watch he wore every day for 20 years. She never told her son Jacob about the money. It felt sacred, like the last part of Tom she could hold on to. And for a while, she thought maybe it would help them both someday. But time has a way of testing even the strongest bonds. Jacob was full of energy, restless, dreaming bigger than their small Kentucky town. He wanted to move to Chicago, find work in a mechanic shop, make real money. She didn't want to hold him back. So she packed him some sandwiches, pressed a $100 bill into his hand, and watched him drive away with everything he owned in the trunk of his car. At first, he called every Sunday. He told her about the city, the tall buildings, the loud buses, the strange smell of the train. He sent her a photo of the tiny apartment. He found a bare mattress on the floor, a single window with a view of the skyline. She printed the photo and taped it to the wall above her sewing machine. Every day she looked at it and smiled. Then came the phone call. His voice was softer than usual, nervous. He talked about rent, how expensive everything was. He said, "Mom, if I had a little help, I could buy a place. Just something small. I found a unit. The bank's willing to loan me most of it, but I need help with the down payment." I was thinking, maybe the money from Dad. Her hand clenched the phone. That money had been untouched for 2 years. It was supposed to be for emergencies, a safety net. But Jacob's voice cracked. He said, "It's for us, Mom. I'll bring you here one day. We'll live together." You won't have to worry anymore. She wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. So she said yes. The next day, she wired him all $40,000, every last cent. And when he sent her another photo, this time of the empty apartment with white walls and a city skyline, she looked at it and whispered, "We're getting closer." She worked harder, raised 2 pigs instead of 1, planted more tomatoes, took on extra sewing jobs. She saved every penny, sent him money for paint for furniture for a new stove. She never asked for anything in return. His smile was enough, but over time, the calls faded. Once a week turned to once a month. Eventually, she was the one calling, leaving voicemails, sending small packages, cookies, socks, letters with $10 bills tucked inside. She added notes like "Don't forget to eat" or "Love you always." She never got replies, but she kept sending them, just in case. Then, one morning, her neighbor handed her an envelope. "I think this was delivered to me by mistake," she said, smiling. It was a wedding invitation. Jacob's wedding. 2 weeks away. In Chicago. He hadn't called, hadn't mentioned it, not a word. Martha stared at the envelope for a long time. She read it again and again, hoping the words would change. They didn't. So she packed her best dress, the navy blue one with lace trim, and booked a bus ticket. 12 hours, 2 transfers. She didn't care. She would be there. She would show up. The chapel was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows, white roses, guests in tailored suits and pastel dresses. She found her name on a small card placed at the back. Last row, near the door. She sat quietly. No one greeted her, not even Jacob. When he walked down the aisle, he didn't look at her, not once. At the reception, she lingered by the wall, watched him dance, watched him toast, watched him laugh with people she'd never met. She raised her hand once half-heartedly. He didn't see, or maybe he did, and just looked away. No one asked her to join the family photos. No one invited her to speak. It was as if she wasn't there at all. She left before dessert. That night in a motel room near the bus station, she whispered into the dark, "I don't think he saw me." But the truth was, he hadn't seen her in years. Weeks passed after the wedding, then months. The phone never rang. Her mailbox was quiet. No thank you card, no call to ask how she was. She still sent little care packages, peanut butter cookies, a scarf she knitted in soft gray yarn, a card that said, "Thinking of you." But nothing came back. No reply, no acknowledgement. The silence wasn't loud, it was just permanent. One day, her neighbor Connie mentioned it like she was talking about the weather. "Jacob's a dad now, isn't he? Someone said his wife had a baby girl last week." Martha froze. The words didn't register right away. A baby. A granddaughter. She hadn't known. No call. No picture. Not even a message. She went inside and picked up the phone. Her hands trembled as she dialed. It rang 4 times. Then, a woman's voice answered. Not Jacob. It was her daughter-in-law. "Oh," the voice said flatly, "it's you." Martha tried to keep her tone steady. "I just heard about the baby. I didn't know." The reply came quick and sharp. "Well, we've been busy. Jacob's had a lot going on. We didn't have time to update everyone." "I would have helped," Martha whispered. "I could have come, or just been there." There was a pause. Then the voice on the other end shifted. Cold, calculated. "If you really want to help, you can come take care of the baby. We're both working. We need someone during the week." Martha blinked. "I'm not sure I can. My back's not what it used to be. I have trouble lifting." The voice cut her off. If you're too old to help, maybe you shouldn't expect anything from us. You want Jacob to take care of you, then you need to be useful. Useful. That word echoed. It wasn't just a rejection. It was a declaration. She wasn't family. She wasn't loved. She was a function, a tool, a temporary babysitter only if convenient. And if she couldn't serve that purpose, then she deserved nothing. She hung up without another word. The phone felt hot in her hand, as if it had burned her. She stood in the kitchen motionless while the sun crept across the floor in golden slats. Birds chirped outside. But inside, something shifted. For the first time in her life, she saw the truth. Not a bitter version, not through anger or pain, just clarity. She had given everything, her time, her money, her body, her dreams, her entire identity for the people she loved. And now she was not a person to them. She was an obligation. She walked slowly to the table, the one Tom had built decades ago. She sat down and looked out at the empty yard. No footsteps, no laughter, just wind in the grass and the creak of a forgotten porch swing. She made a decision. She would not call again. She would not wait for an apology. She would not beg for scraps of affection from people who had decided she was disposable. She had spent a lifetime putting others first. And now, it was time to choose herself. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply stopped. Stopped waiting. Stopped sending care packages. Stopped checking the mailbox. She started noticing the silence around her house. Not the silence of abandonment, but the silence of absence, of possibility, of space. Tom was gone. Jacob was gone. The people, the dinners, the laughter, they were all gone. But she was still here, still breathing. One morning, as she bent to feed the hens, a dull ache ran through her hip. She paused, gripped the fence for support. It wasn't new pain, but this time it asked a question. If not now, when she looked toward the barn, the paint was chipped. The garden was overgrown. The canning jars in the pantry still lined the shelves, waiting for holidays that never came. She stood upright and whispered out loud, "What am I still waiting for?" She already knew the answer. Nothing. No one. That afternoon, she opened a fresh notebook. On the first page, she wrote a list. What she owned, what she could sell, what she needed. She called a realtor. She made an appointment at the bank. She searched online for small apartments in nearby towns. She didn't look for luxury. She looked for sidewalks, for libraries, for a grocery store within walking distance, for places with life. It wasn't about running away. It wasn't even about loneliness. It was about something deeper, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in decades. Self-respect. For years, she had told herself that being a mother meant giving everything, asking for nothing. But that's not love. That's erasure. She wasn't just somebody's mother. She was still a woman, a whole, breathing, thinking person. And that person deserved to live. So she began to let go. She sorted through the house box by box. She wrapped Tom's photograph in a soft towel and placed it in her suitcase. She donated clothes, gave away furniture, sold the good china she'd been saving for Christmas dinners that never happened. And when everything she owned fit into the back of a borrowed pickup truck, she took one last walk through the farmhouse. She didn't feel bitter. She didn't feel sad. She felt free. She moved into a modest one-bedroom apartment in a small brick building just outside town. The walls were thin. The kitchen barely held 2 people. But the sunlight poured in through the windows, and the silence didn't hurt anymore. It felt warm, honest, hers. She found work cleaning the nearby church. Early mornings before the congregation arrived. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid for groceries and a coffee now and then. And it gave her something she hadn't felt in years: purpose. She'd wake up before sunrise, tie her hair back, put on her soft-soled shoes, and walk the 2 blocks to the church. She kept a little radio in her coat pocket. She mopped the floors, dusted the pews, lit a candle or 2. Sometimes she'd sit quietly in the back pew before she left, not to pray, just to breathe. Her days began to follow a rhythm. Groceries on Tuesdays, laundry on Thursdays, letters to herself on Sundays. She no longer sent packages to Jacob. No more calls, no more hoping. At first, the silence felt strange. Then it began to feel like strength. She started planting herbs on her windowsill: basil, mint, rosemary. She hung a wind chime outside her door. She bought herself a small bunch of yellow tulips every Friday. She didn't tell anyone. She didn't need to. Every so often, she'd see a young mother passing by with a stroller, and her heart would ache just a little. But she didn't let that ache define her. Love doesn't disappear. Not real love. But it can stop controlling you. She had done her part. She had given all she could. Now, it was her turn. One night, as she sat with her tea looking out at the soft glow of streetlights, she whispered something to herself. "I'm still here." And that was enough. There is a quiet kind of strength in starting over. It doesn't come with applause. It doesn't make headlines. It doesn't even feel powerful at first. It feels strange, like walking in shoes you haven't worn in years. But slowly, day by day, something shifts. For Martha, the shift wasn't sudden. It happened in the moments between. In the soft clink of her tea mug against the sink. In the morning sunlight filtering through her thin curtains. In the small joy of finding fresh parsley on sale at the market. She was building a life. Not a grand one. Not the one she thought she'd have. But a life that belonged to her. She joined a book group at the library. She didn't say much at first, just listened. But after a few weeks, someone asked her what she thought of the story, and she spoke. Her voice was quiet but sure. They listened, they nodded, and she realized she still had something to say. One Tuesday afternoon, while walking home with a bag of apples, she saw a sign in the window of the community center. It read, "Gentle Yoga for Seniors. First class free." She hesitated. Then she laughed out loud. Martha had never done yoga a day in her life, but she folded the paper and put it in her coat pocket. That Thursday, she showed up. She wore soft pants and a t-shirt with a faded sunflower on it. The instructor smiled and helped her onto a mat. The moves were simple: stretch, breathe, reach, rest. But halfway through the class, as she lay flat on the mat with her eyes closed and her chest rising slowly with each breath, she felt something strange and beautiful. She felt alive. That night, she wrote herself a letter, a habit she had picked up from a woman in her book club. The letter said, "You didn't disappear. You paused. You didn't get left behind. You chose a different path. You're not alone. You're just beginning." And that was true. What Martha didn't know was that there were women just like her in every neighborhood. Women who had given and then been left behind. Women who had names and dreams and stories that no one had asked about in years. Like Diane, who spent 25 years caring for her mother with Alzheimer's, only to be put into assisted living by her children the week after the funeral. Or Margaret, who cashed in her savings to help her daughter open a bakery, only to be told years later that mom's energy is just too negative to be around. These women weren't failures, they were foundations. But the world had a way of forgetting that. Martha thought about that a lot, especially on the nights when she couldn't sleep. She'd sit by the window watching the quiet world drift by and wonder how many other women were out there sitting in their kitchens asking themselves the same question. What am I still here for? She wanted to tell them, you're here because you matter, not because you raised someone, not because you cooked meals or folded sheets or covered tuition. You matter because you are still breathing, still loving, still learning how to belong to yourself. One day, she decided to write a letter to her granddaughter. She didn't know if she'd ever get to meet her, or if the letter would ever be read. But she wrote it anyway. She wrote about the sound of crickets at night and the way the garden smelled after it rained. She wrote about Tom's laugh and the way Jacob used to fall asleep in her arms when he was a baby. She wrote about yellow tulips and chamomile tea and the strength it takes to keep loving even when love isn't returned. She sealed the letter and put it in a shoebox under her bed. Alongside it were more letters. One for every week, some addressed to herself, others to no one in particular. They were pieces of a story that mattered even if no one else knew it, because she knew it. She was the keeper of her own history now, and slowly she began to smile more, to walk taller, to laugh not because something was funny, but because she had remembered how. Her body ached sometimes. Her hips still flared up, but she moved with a kind of grace that only comes from knowing pain and choosing to live anyway. At the diner near her apartment, the waitress knew her name. "Morning, Miss Martha," she'd say, pouring the coffee. And Martha would smile, her fingers wrapped around the warm cup, and reply, "It's a good morning, isn't it?" She started saving again. Just a little. Coins in a jar. A small envelope tucked into a drawer labeled Trip Fund. She didn't know where she'd go. Maybe a lake. Maybe a museum in a nearby town. Maybe just a ride on a train to nowhere in particular. Just to feel the tracks rumble beneath her and know she was going somewhere. Because she was. One afternoon, she ran into an old neighbor from her town. The woman blinked, surprised. "Martha, is that you? You look, well..." Martha smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "I am," she said simply. "I really am." And she meant it. Not every day was easy. Some days, she still felt the sting of being forgotten. Still caught herself checking her phone, hoping for a message. Still found herself staring too long at a baby in a stroller, wondering what her granddaughter looked like. But those moments didn't define her anymore. She had written a new story. Not one written for her by others. One she was writing each morning with every cup of tea, every book club laugh, every herb planted, every yoga stretch, every kind word exchanged with a stranger. And she knew she was never truly alone. There is something the world forgets to tell women as they age. It's not written in any manual. It's not mentioned during doctor visits or family dinners. It is this: the older you become, the more you will disappear, not in body, but in recognition. You will become the quiet fixture at the edge of a photo, the name missing from a guest list, the person thanked in passing, but rarely invited in full. Your opinions may still be spoken, but fewer people will listen. You may still be beautiful, but the world will call it dignified instead of seeing it fully. You may be present in every moment and yet still feel like a ghost in your own story. Martha learned that truth slowly, not through any one moment of cruelty, but through the accumulation of being passed over. Forgotten birthdays, unanswered texts, the sound of silence replacing connection. It didn't come with cruelty, it came with absence. And absence over time becomes its own kind of wound. But she also learned something else, a counter-truth, a quiet rebellion. The older you become, the less you owe anyone who does not see your value. There is a powerful freedom in letting go of expectations that were never met. A radical strength in choosing yourself not as a backup plan, but as the first choice. And Martha, in her late 60s, discovered that freedom. Not because someone handed it to her, but because she took it slowly, quietly, and without apology. There is a woman named Luan who lives 2 states over, 73 years old, widowed, no children. She rides the city bus to the library every Tuesday and hosts a poetry night at the community center. She spent 40 years as a nurse. No one visits her now, but every time she reads aloud from her notebook, her voice shakes the room. She once said, "I'm not invisible. You just need to stop looking through me." And then there's Sheila, 66, divorced for 20 years. She lives in a converted camper behind her nephew's barn. She makes soap and sells it at farmers' markets. She keeps a notebook of all the women she's met who remind her of herself. Her stories are short and fierce, like one-line memoirs. Gave up my retirement for a man who gave up on me. Taught 3 kids to ride bikes. None of them call. Finally planted lavender just for me. Martha hadn't met them, but she knew them. Because she was them. They are everywhere. The women who gave until it bled. The women who believed in a future that never arrived. The women who weren't just caregivers, but the emotional architects of generations. And now many of them are standing at windows, walking grocery aisles, cleaning church pews, wondering if anyone remembers who they used to be. But now they are beginning to remember themselves. This remembering doesn't always look brave. Sometimes it's just buying your own cup of coffee without guilt. Saying no when your adult child asks for money you don't have. Wearing the floral dress even if no one is watching. Taking a nap at noon because your body has earned it. Writing your own obituary now, not because you're morbid, but because you want to be remembered by your own words. Martha's remembering began with silence, then small choices, then larger ones. She didn't have a retirement plan, but she had a library card. She didn't have a financial safety net, but she had her wits. She didn't have Sunday dinners with grandchildren, but she had a neighbor who brought over soup when the snow came early. She didn't have a son who called, but she had a growing collection of wildflowers in mason jars on her windowsill. She learned how to take walks without needing a destination. How to sit in a movie theater alone and still laugh out loud. How to mend the hole in her own sleeve. How to say I'm okay and mean it, not because everything was perfect, but because she was no longer pretending. She began to notice her reflection again, not to check for wrinkles, but to see herself. And one day, while standing in the dollar store aisle comparing hand lotions, she overheard a woman maybe 30, maybe younger, sighing with frustration at a toddler throwing a tantrum. Martha smiled gently, and without intrusion said, "You're doing better than you think." The woman looked at her eyes wide and said, "Thank you. I really needed to hear that." It was small, but it mattered because older women are not meant to vanish. They are meant to pass torches. They are meant to anchor stories. They are meant to walk beside younger women and say, "You will make it, and so will I." Martha no longer expected reconciliation with her son. She no longer stared at her phone. She no longer waited. But that didn't mean she had stopped loving him or her granddaughter. She just stopped measuring her worth by whether or not they loved her back. That is the difference. To love without losing yourself. To give without becoming invisible. To age without apology. The seasons changed. The winter came and left. Spring brought cherry blossoms along the edges of the sidewalks Martha now walked daily. She no longer moved in hesitation. Her steps were slower, yes, but they were rooted, certain. She had grown into her own company and found that it was not empty, it was rich. One morning, she found a small envelope slipped under her apartment door. Inside was a folded piece of paper with careful handwriting. It read, "Thank you for your kindness. You remind me of my grandmother." No signature, no explanation, just that. And it made her cry not from sadness, but from the overwhelming sensation of being seen. She placed the note next to her tulips and let the silence in the room soften around her. Not all silences are empty. Some are sacred. She sat down, took out her pen, and began another letter. This one wasn't to Jacob, not to her granddaughter, not even to herself. It was to the version of her who had once sat at that kitchen table surrounded by grief, whispering, "I don't think he saw me." She wrote, "He didn't, but you are still here, and I see you. Every wrinkle holds a story, every scar a choice. Every quiet morning is a chance to begin again." And that letter stayed folded on her nightstand until the day she left this world. She didn't leave behind wealth. She didn't leave behind family photos taken every Christmas. She didn't leave behind a retirement plan or a well-kept home filled with grandchildren's laughter. But she left behind something else. She left behind a record of her becoming. She left behind the proof that it is never too late to return to yourself. That a woman's worth is not defined by who she raised or who still calls or what is left in the bank. That piece is not a gift someone else gives you. It is something you claim, sometimes in the stillness, sometimes in the mess, sometimes in the quiet triumph of waking up alone and still choosing joy. She became her own witness, her own validation, her own family, and in that, she became free. And you listening now, you sitting with tea in your hand wondering if the world has passed you by? Please hear this. You are not too late. You are not invisible. You are not used up or forgotten or broken. You are a woman with chapters left to write. You are a voice the world still needs. And maybe no one ever said it clearly enough before. So let me say it now, you matter. Not because of what you give or what you did, but because you exist. And that is reason enough to choose yourself every single day from here on out. So light the candle, wear the dress, plant the flowers, write the letter, take the trip, dance in your kitchen, call your own name and answer it with love. The world may not always see you, but you dear, beautiful, resilient, you see yourself. And that is where everything begins again. And if this story echoed something in your own heart, maybe it's time we keep this conversation going. Subscribe to this channel so we can keep telling stories like this. Stories that see you, hold you, and remind you of your worth. Click the like button if Martha's journey stirred something in you. Leave a comment and tell us what part of her story felt like your own. And if you know a woman who needs to hear this, a sister, a mother, a friend, share this video with her. Because no woman should feel invisible, not anymore, not here. We're building something quiet, but powerful. And you, yes, you belong.